So let me just recap on the last point that I made. What we're talking about is not literally an annihilation of identity. This is as I said before, it's a cliche. And it gives completely the wrong impression. What we're talking about is a radically expanded or transformed identity. One whose nature is not self-preservation, but something else. Self-differentiation is a word that I like to use. And this is a consciousness that is not necessarily personal. It's not orientated towards the preservation of one's personhood, which would be what Guru Nanak calls manmukh. But this is impersonal consciousness or self-differentiation, and that kind of person is called Gurmukh. So let's talk a little bit about the nature of this kind of self-differentiating person, the Gurmukh. And to do that, I want to go back to Guru Nanak's, the way he talks through this radically transformed sense of identity. So I said earlier that Guru Nanak, after this transformatory experience, speaks but no longer through the ego, no longer through this psychic structure which basically speaks to itself by saying, I am myself, and preserves its own existence. Its primary purpose is to preserve its own existence, its boundaries, and to set itself off from the rest of the world. But what exactly does it mean not to speak, to live, or to think on the basis of ego? Is that kind of thing even possible? What other basis is there? And you can get an idea why skeptics have kind of questioned any sense of reality, any sense of normality that is not based on ego existence. And the kind of questions they ask would be as follows. If we negate ego, is this negation of ego not also the negation of rationality? Do you not do away with all forms of rationality? And even a link to the world. Is the ego itself not the link to the world, to language? Do we not simply annihilate all of that? And is Indian spirituality, Eastern spirituality not doing that per se? It's, again, that's a stereotype that we have to kind of contend with. What kind of existence is it when one negates the very basis of one's existence? Okay? How does one exist through self-annihilation? How does one exist by dying to the word, by dying to oneself? Again, I refuse to give up the idea that it's still existence in the world, but it's just a radically different one. Is this normal? Is it real? These are the kind of things we have to kind of contend with, and we have to keep asking that. Well, Guru Nanak himself provides an answer to this. From the very beginning of his writings in the Guru Granth and other texts as well. He says, his answer is an emphatic yes. Yes, it is real, and yes, it is absolutely normal. But he says that with a proviso. The kind of reality created by ego is actually the one that's illusory. That's the one that's abnormal. So the kind of life that society imposes on us, the kind of existence society imposes on us, is actually an illusory one. So Guru Nanak is in a long line of mystics, spiritual adepts, who challenge our ordinary or everyday standpoint of normality. And of course, this fundamentally challenges the basis of the modern worldview, which is, the purpose of which is to maintain ego boundaries, to maintain a very rigid distinction between inside and outside, between us and them, between the self and the other. These are all based on maintaining ego boundaries. So this kind of modern social reality, and it's not just modern social reality, it's a kind of, it's a reality that one could kind of extrapolate onto other times and other cultures as well, but it's one that modernity has accentuated to a much greater extent. So this kind of modern social reality is based on individualism. Individualism means ego separations. It's the dominant trait of modern existence, and central to it is the way that one speaks through ego, a kind of trumpet or trumpeting, if you like, trumpeting oneself to make it very contemporary and relevant today. So what exactly is individualism? Well, individualism, quite simply, and it's the basis of modern psychology, is the growth and the development of ego away from its natural matrix. And we can show this with a diagram. The way, and I hope this will make clear what I'm trying to get across here. So the natural matrix. So what I'm trying to do here is to show the model of individuation through a very simplified psychoanalytic model that could be taken from Freud or from Lacan. And I'm just taking the essence of their psychological model, if you like. So what both Freud and Lacan say, and what I think modern psychology also says, is that the starting point for psychological development begins with the mother-child dyad, which is regarded as lack of ego, non-ego, a kind of void state, if you like, a state of chaos, where one literally cannot speak, one has not acquired language. And as one grows with society, into society, especially at the age of about 3 years old, one enters into language, one imbibes the language of one's own society, and begins to conform with social customs, social norms, that kind of thing. And that in turn creates the sense of reality, the worldview that we eventually have. And that process goes on as we get educated till about the age of 18, when we're supposed to have developed a kind of normalized ego. It can be earlier than 18, of course, but in today's society, 18 is the kind of age when you've achieved stable adulthood, selfhood, if you like. And that is essentially normal ego development. And the idea is that as you develop towards reality, towards a stable ego, you have to give up the other aspects of your psychology, non-ego, the desire to enter into a void. Basically, you give up any connection to your drives, your emotions, to feelings, which are all kind of dumped into this illusory domain. So I hope that makes some sense. Again, I'm projecting it in a way that will hopefully make some sense to us and be relevant to the kind of model that Guru Nanak was dealing with. So, in a sense, this is precisely the model of individualism that Guru Nanak himself had to resist, or was resisting. He resisted the normalized entry into language, the normalized social conformity, which his parents and society were trying to impose on him. And there seemed to be something else that he was kind of bringing in, and that's what I want to kind of quickly look at. But this also raises the question, how does egocentrism arise? Is this purely a social thing? Guru Nanak suggests, and I could go much more deeply into this, but I'm doing it in the space of half an hour here, so there's no time to go into much detail. He says that we create our own sense of normality on the basis of ego itself. And he calls this literally home, literally saying I am myself. And it's a mode of speech, fundamentally a mode of speech. So ego is that entity which says I am myself. And in saying that, one possesses oneself, one preserves oneself. And in saying that, one also fundamentally assumes that I am one. And that oneness, based on individuation, is the basis of all reality. So the oneness derives from my I and gives a coherence to all reality and individuation. So I'm building a worldview and a reality based on this ego that I'm constructing as I grow into the society that I've entered into. So, but what does Guru Nanak actually say about this? What he indicates, and it comes as early as stanzas 1 and 2 in the Japji Sahib, which is his very important hymn, and he's speaking about the way he's telling us how do we realize the one. He's asking us, how does one realize, how does one experience oneness, the state of oneness? And I've just picked out a couple of lines here that are very, very relevant from stanzas 1 and 2. He asks the question, how then to undergo the experience of the one that is not separated into inside and outside, self and other? Is there a one that is beyond that, a oneness that is beyond that? How to break the wall of duality? And Nanak answers that question himself. He's talking to himself, effectively, and says, align yourself with nature's law, hukam. Align yourself with hukam, and that hukam is already inscribed with the self. It's already part of the ego. So straight away we realize that he's not negating the ego as such. He's not annihilating it. He's telling us that the ego itself contains something which allows you to question it. And then he goes on to ask in stanza 2, but what is that natural law, hukam, that is inscribed on the self? He's asking, what exactly is the nature of this hukam that's already inscribed with the ego? And his answer again is, O Nanak, if you want to understand the nature of this hukam, of this law, then let the ego not say, I am. That's his fundamental answer. Meaning, kahe means do not say, do not speak in this way. Let the ego not say, I am. So what is the ego then supposed to do? This is the question. So Guru Nanak's solution to the problem of ego preservation is to accept hukam, and that hukam fundamentally is basically saying, let not the ego say I am. In other words, speak otherwise than I am. Speak differently. See the emphasis on speech here. Very, very important. He's not talking about going silent, going into yourself or anything like that, but he's changing the nature of speech, and along with speech, the nature of thought as well. So let the ego not say, I am, or let the ego say, I am not. Now that's where the misunderstanding occurs, because from the perspective that we live in today, that would be regarded as a kind of self-annihilation, ego annihilation. Let the ego say, I am not. It sounds like a surrender to annihilation, but it's not that at all. What he's actually saying is speak, think, feel, and act so that you don't generate the I, that you generate not an I am, but an I am not. Now, what am I actually saying with this? What I'm suggesting is, and this is coming from Guru Nanak, is that there is another part of the psyche, the I am not, which is just as important as the I am, as Homer. So with Homer, with the ego, there is a split between them, and the idea is to keep those two halves intact. And so when you hear about Guru Nanak talking about pining for the beloved is his other half, which is that half which is split away from him, and which we push away, create boundaries between and push beyond the wall. We call that the other. And yet that other is already part of us. It's part of who we are. So the question that I'm asking here is that annihilation? And the answer is clearly no. Ego loss is not an annihilation. So just using the terminology of mystical experience. So mystical experience is mystical because it inscribes ego loss. So mystics aren't silent as such. It's just that their words are silent. The question then arises, well, what exactly are silent words? How does one bring about ego loss? How does one go from ego to non-ego, from I am to I might not be, from I exist to I might not exist, from self-certainty to self-doubt? How does one keep the two things together? And of course, one can also ask, is it even practical to ask those kind of questions? Is it even useful? I'd like to just hint that there is also a kind of a violence, an originary violence, if you like, a primal violence in the resistance to ego, which is the origin of all normalized social violence, if you like. And it's that violence is a violence towards one's own sense of self-preservation. It's a struggle with oneself, a struggle with one's ego. This completely alters our kind of modern definition of violence, of boundaries, of self-preservation. So just to come back to that model here, what we're trying to, what I'm trying to suggest is that Guru Nanak is pushing back at this kind of normalized model of normal ego development. And I'm actually going to skip this and go on to the next page. Now this might seem like a lot to take in, but I'm going to try and prize it out as best I can. Can you just stop?